Hello and welcome to Literature Across Borders Year 3. We are here with our third pairing for the year and I can't wait to tell you all about it. But first, a very short introduction to what Literature Across Borders is in case you're coming in on this dialogue and you haven't caught up with us before. So Literature Across Borders is a project to make books for children and young people and the conversations about them travel across borders. Books, particularly for children, are so critical in the development of empathy and also the type of sociocultural values that really help all of us in all societies around the world realize human rights principles in the real world. And if those stop at borders, it really kind of defeats the point of them being human rights. So that's kind of what we're doing in this project. And this year, we're so delighted that we also have a schools scheme. So there'll be some schools watching these videos and following along, and then we'll be catching up with their librarians and their teachers and their pupils to talk about these books too. So that is where we are with Literature Across Borders. But today I am delighted to introduce you to our third pairing, which is about disability and sibling relationships in books for children and young people. And Clare McCarron will be chairing this wonderful session and will be introducing you to the participants. So we have for our two books, Mel Darbon's What the World Doesn't See, Anushka Ravishankar's Dhanak. And in these books, which have at least one sibling with a disability, they're setting off on some sort of transformative journey. So there are lots of similarities that we'll hear about in a minute when Clare introduces you to our lovely participants. So Clare McCarron grew up exploring Edinburgh's wild edges, studied botany at Aberdeen and became a biology teacher before her love of drama led her to retrain as an actor at the Bristol Old Vic Theatre School. Her writing reflects the organised chaos of classrooms and the lure of the landscape she loves. Her debut verse novel, set in the Highlands of Scotland, draws on the angst and anger of a young teen plagued by the shadow of parental alcoholism. She graduated with a distinction from MA in Writing for Young People at Bristol University in February 2025. Over to you, Clare. Thank you so much, and thank you to all our listeners and to our participants.
Thank you so much, Lexi. I'd love to introduce our participants for dialogue. I'm going to start with Part Lakani, who's a Teach for India fellow, and he's currently pursuing his master's degree in English at Ashoka University. He's interested in children's literature and in Shakespeare and modern poetry. Rachel Hammond loves stories inspired by folklore and myth, and she's in her first year of the MA Writing for Young People programme at Bath Spa University. And welcome also to Suzanne Faria, who is a Literature Across Borders alumnus from season 2. And she's also pursuing the MA in Writing for Young People programme at Bath Spa University part-time and is passionate about inclusive stories for children that can reflect many different life experiences. So let's get to it. I hope that you enjoyed reading both the books as much as I did, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts. So for the first question, I'd like to go to Suzanne first, and then to Part, and then to Rachel, please. So I'm interested in if this was your first time reading a book for young people by an author from the UK or India, and I'd love to know your initial reaction to the books and what your reading experience was like.
So I have read other books intended for young people, primarily because of being a part of the Literature Across Borders project. So I've read Beastly Tales by Vikram Seth and also illustrated non-fiction, which was People of the Indus Valley by Nikhil Galati. The experience of reading Dhanak was totally immersive. I was gripped and I read the book in one sitting and I absolutely loved the story. I felt the reading experience was a bit like being a part of the creation of a dual jigsaw, with each scene like a piece that gradually fit together in a satisfying, complete whole. So that was my reading experience.
I think I grew up reading almost exclusively literature from the UK. The steady diet of Roald Dahl and in Blyton, and one of my favorite early reading experiences was reading The Hobbit by Tolkien. And because I was born in the early 2000s, there was also a lot of J.K. Rowling. So there's familiarity with this kind of cultural context and the physical landscapes. I mean, I knew what Cornwall was, which a large part of what the world does not see is set. But then there was also certain kind of linguistic specificities that I needed to get over and kind of gather context clues to understand. Words like shite reappearing all the time, buddy, the phrase creased up. So that I thought adds a lot of texture to your reading, because it sets the world firmly in a particular place. Apart from that, I felt the book was immensely readable. I mean, I was running through it and I finished it in a single sitting, essentially. It was quick paced, there's a very interesting narrative. And I also really enjoyed the kind of stylistic decisions in the book that Mel Darbon makes, alternating chapters between Jake and Maudie, and how they come with their own kind of voices and their own kind of styles. And I would love to talk more about that as we go on.
So I've read many books by for children by UK authors, but this was my first time reading books for young people written by Indian authors. I read 2 books for this year's Literature Across Borders, Dhanak and Survival Tips for Lunatics by Shanda Minas, which is excellent. I had no expectations of the books before because I'd never heard of them before, and that was actually really refreshing. I can't remember the last time I read a book without some kind of preconceived idea of what it would be about. So what really struck me about Dhanak, or both of them in fact, was how comical they were despite their serious themes. So in Dhanak we have disability and peril, and essentially in Survival Tips for Lunatics we have child abandonment. 2 young siblings are left to fend for themselves in the wild. And yet the characters all the way through, they were making jokes and teasing each other, and it was genuinely hilarious in the face of adversity. And it made me wonder if that is a reflection on Indian society, being stoic and able to find humor and joy and positivity when things actually feel pretty dire, or it might just be the writing style of these particular authors. But I found the reading experience of Dhanak very emotional. I laughed and I cried. I was very attached to the characters. They felt incredibly real to me. And then likewise with Mel Darbon's What the World Doesn't See, I grew to love her characters too. And that was a real tearjerker of a book too.
Thank you so much. I'd love to come to Part first for the next question, followed by Rachel and then Suzanne, just so that you know your order. So both of the books have complex internal and external journeys. I'd just love it if you could talk a bit about how this helped us to get closer to the characters and to understand the sibling relationships, which also are so prevalent in both of the books.
First, I was just struck by the enormous amount of formal similarities between the books, because both the books are essentially a quest for a figure, and in both cases it felt a lot like at least in Dhanak it was a mythical figure, Shah Rukh Khan, the popular actor, and in Darbon it was, What the World Doesn't See, it was the mother, who I think had become a sort of like a quasi-mythical figure because of the distance separating her and her children. So using this kind of journey, which felt like it drew a lot from kind of myths and tropes, like the search for the Holy Grail, where the object of the journey is not really finding Shah Rukh Khan, or not really finding, or at least in lesser extent, not really finding the mother, but the object of the journey is the journey itself, and what is revealed through the challenges and adversities that the characters face there. So looking at this kind of external journey which is parallel to the internal journeys that the characters are making. For instance, in What the World Doesn't See, Maudie realizes that Jake can have more independence and should have more independence than she believes he's capable of. I thought it was very, very interesting and very, very, what's the word? I think it enlarges when you have a story that's drawing from so many mythical narratives. It enlarges the story, and then there's the story that reverberates across cultural contexts.
So the journey that Parry feels forced to take Chotu on as a last resort to get his eyesight back is long and arduous and dangerous, and it pushes Parry and Chotu's relationship almost to destruction. And on the way, they are in some very dangerous situations, but Chotu has a lot of faith in his sister protecting him all the time. And I just wanted to read this a section from page 51 where Chotu's explaining how he became blind to his new friend Shamsha. And Shamsha says, "Were you scared?" And Chotu says, "I was very scared. I kept crying, but Parry was there. She's always there holding my hand, so I don't get scared." And then on page 58, where the children are waiting to catch a bus, and there's a policeman who's questioning them about why they're there without parents. "I had a blind uncle," said the policeman, staring at Chotu. "Such a nuisance, needed someone with him all the time." "I don't need anyone," said Chotu, "only Parry." And I absolutely love that because it just, these examples show the dependency that Chotu has on Parry and the pressure that Parry is under. And she's only 2 years older than Chotu. She's only 10 or 11. And yet she had to be the serious, mature one. She is Chotu's protector and guide. And she had to grow up fast because she's carrying the burden of the promise that she's made to him that she would get his eyesight back before he's 9. And just to be clear, Chotu isn't the burden, it's the weight of the promise that she's carrying. And what we see on this journey is Paddy crumbling under that weight. And as she crumbles, Chotu lashes out at her and he blames her for taking them on this journey. And when towards the end, when it gets very dire and Parry collapses in the sand dunes, Chotu experiences for the first time feeling alone and afraid. And I think this is a turning point in their relationship when Chotu learns to not take Parry for granted. And it gets really dark, but things do work out well in the end. But I feel like Chotu needed to experience that hardship and that sense of hopelessness to fully appreciate his sister.
Yeah, so I resonate with everything everyone said. I felt like the external journeys and internal journeys in both books are so closely linked. And I felt that the journey in Dhanak shows the increasing strength of both Parry and Chotu and highlights the closeness of their bond. And we know from the start that Parry is deeply protective of Chotu. And we also see his growth in seeing that she might need protecting, and we hear his wish to be able to protect her too. And I felt in negotiating both the kind of the pleasures and the perils of the external journey, we saw Chotu's internal growth as suddenly his world isn't certain and predictable anymore that we're told he really needs at the beginning. But he manages this, and we see his kind of quick mind, his spontaneity, and his humour. They all seem to increase, I felt, as we were reading. I had the sense of him becoming bigger as we followed him through the journey. And there are very strong moments of Parry too, and significant meetings, which I felt changed her worldview. For example, she does revise her assessment of some of the characters they meet and learns from that. And also I felt that the kind of development, I don't know if this is her sense of a kind of larger spiritual transpersonal sense of the world. And as when she meets with the dancers and the robbers and the wise woman, I found that bit really moving. And similarly in The World Doesn't See, I in fact agree with Pa, Maudie's kidnapping Jake. She discovers that actually he's got much more capabilities and she has been overprotected. So I felt like in both these books that we're brought right inside the characters as they find ways through their challenges. And in each book, that sibling bond is so strong and so moving.
Thank you. Great answers. Thank you for your insights on those internal and external journeys. And completely agree about the role of humour, which I think helps earn our empathy. So I'd like to come to Rachel first for the next question, and then Suzanne, and then Part, please. So do you think there are significant differences in how each of the books illuminates the obstacles of negotiating the world while living with disability?
So yes, I think that there are significant differences, and I think it's because Chotu and Jake's disabilities and environment and abilities to communicate are so different. Chotu is able to articulate his experiences fully, often in very colourful language, and at times he seems to be hardly affected by his disability. Some of the characters even question whether he's actually blind. Even his own sister, on page 2, we see it was important that everything happened exactly the same way every day. It helped Chotu feel in control. And when things went smoothly, Pari could sometimes forget that her brother was blind. He's the joker, he's the clown, he's funny and fearless, and often behaves like he doesn't have a disability. I even forgot, and I feel really bad about this, but I even forgot momentarily on my first read through that he was blind, which I think is telling in itself when we're discussing invisible disabilities. And any obstacles that there are, it's Pari that navigates them for him. But we do see the frustration grow in Chotu as their journey progresses. And on page 104, he complains at being dragged around by Pari's dupatta. He says, "Why must you always tie me on a leash like a dog?" Whereas for Jake, because he has limited speech and can't easily communicate his feelings, most of the obstacles are illuminated through Maudie's point of view, especially in the flashback scenes. And almost everything is a potential obstacle for Jake because his learning disability is so severe. Every interaction with the world has the potential to be confusing and frightening for him. So yes, I think they were shown differently.
Yes, I agree with Rachel. There are a lot of differences. I initially was aware of the similarities. In Dhanak, we were made very aware from the start of the importance for Choto that everything happens in the same way every day. It helps him feel in control. And that's so hugely important for Jake in the world, in what the world doesn't see, which of course is the prompt for Maudie to rescue him because he's been torn away from absolutely everything familiar by being put into care. So we can see that predictability helps each of these characters negotiate every day demands, and we also see both sisters trying to provide this for them, especially when Maudie trying to look after her brother in the caravan, and they both work so hard, both so loving and challenging, so loving and caring, despite the challenges that are arising. And I felt both books offer such a moving portrait of unconditional love between siblings. But then for Pari, predictability is completely lost, as that actually is in fact for Jake, but not in such a severe way. And I also identified a difference in food in the books. This might be a bit left field, but I felt that the food was a character in each book, and there was quite a difference. Jake, we see he needs the right food on the right day, although we also see him beginning to be able to adapt to different foods as he grows. And in Dhanak, food is equally important. Choto loves food as long as he's got plenty of it and he can shovel it in, especially sweets. I felt it made for really mouth-watering reading, actually. I really love this. As long as there's food, he's happy and can manage everything. There's trouble if he's hungry. And I also felt there's a difference in how humour is used in Dhanak to great effect for how humour, I mean, I think we've touched on this already in our discussion, humour helps the characters find resilience in negotiating the sometimes terrifying challenges along the way. And Pari can also use her sense of humour to cope when Choto's particularly tricky. There's one point that I wish he'd had his mouth taken away rather than his eyesight, which really made me laugh.
I agree with so much of what's been said, but I want to attend to first what I thought were the central similarities between the texts. First is that while their specific kind of disability poses personal challenges for both the characters, for both Jake and Choto, but I think the books also attend to a lot to how a key part of the disability experience is the social response to disability. By which I mean the unkind travelers on the bus, that terrorized Jake. I'm thinking about the bullies at Churudhani at the beginning of Dhanak that kind of humiliate Chotu. And what I found emerging from this was that both the books are joined in how they center the importance of the social response to disability and how they are critical of this kind of effective response of pity, disgust, shame that characterizes the social response to disability. Apart from that, for me, the most significant difference was that the aim of the books, each of the books, was entirely different. While the aim of Dhanak was the restoration of an able body, by which I mean Chotu getting his eyesight back through an eye transplant, but that seems to be very far removed from the aim of What the World Doesn't See, where there is no possibility of Jake ever having a neurotypical mind, and it is then the aim is not assimilation or integration into an able body or into a society of able bodies, but instead it is asking for kindness and empathy towards Jake.
Thank you so much. Some really wide-ranging and fabulous responses there. I loved Fuda's character. I hadn't thought of that, but absolutely. And I like that insight as well, part of being joined in the response to disability, but those different aims, because it's talked quite a lot about, isn't it, in writing where we're trying to portray a disability, about it being restoration of able bodies or not assimilation, and actually trying to show that this is how those individuals are. So yeah, that was a very good insight. Thank you. Right then, should we have Suzanne first for the next question, and then followed by Part, and then Rachel. So we're going to look now at how each novel portrays the resilience and the challenges of facing adversity. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about the part that the settings played in that.
Well, actually, I felt the setting in Dhanak is entwined throughout with how we see Choto and Parry's resilience grow in the face of adversity. And we start off with knowing that everyone in the village knows how devoted Parry is to her brother. So the postman does post a letter. Choto can stomp out of his house in the middle of the night in a temper tantrum, and Parry's confident actually he'll come back when he's hungry. And this, I felt the setting really portrayed a sense of a linked community where people are connected. They know each other, they know of each other, they know what's happening elsewhere throughout the narrative. And so that Choto and Parry, they're so within this culture, this setting, that their resilience is helped and they grow through that, if that makes sense. And I loved the scenes we're taken into in terms of setting and seeing resilience grow. Like, for example, in the journey, Parry's able to think very quickly about how to manage when the Jeep breaks down. Next thing, they're joining a procession, chanting, going to the Shri Mata temple and eventually meeting the goddess. which is very humorous reading too. And I thought that was similar when they were rescued by the Kalbilia dancers. Don't know if I pronounced that correctly. Who also seem to be robbers and have magic guiding them. And I thought these wonderful scenes transported me as a reader into the Indian setting, which is just felt completely linked to how we see the characters' resourcefulness grow as they meet the journey's challenges.
I agree a lot with what Rachel and Susan have been talking about, which is the kind of role that humor plays. And I just want to read out a quick scene from Dhanak, which I thought was really interesting. This occurs in kind of the penultimate scene of the book, where Chotu and Pari are in the desert. They've lost their water bottle, and Pari says, "I gave it to you, the bottle, on Gardu Banna's bike. Where did you put it? You left it hanging on the bike, didn't you?" Chotu was silent. "Didn't you?" she screamed. And Chotu says, "How could you give such a big responsibility to an 8-year-old child?" asked Chotu sagely. That too, a blind 8-year-old child. And I felt that, wow. In a moment of mortal peril, this Chotu with his witticisms there. And it was also very interesting that both of these books, before the kind of climax and where everything goes right, there is a moment of natural disaster, essentially, of mortal peril. You have the tide coming in on the beach at Cornwall, and Jake and Morty are stranded along with their injured mother. And at the same time, you have this scene from Dhanak where they're stranded in the middle of the Thar Desert. And so I liked how the setting was very important in constituting a kind of natural danger to the children here.
Yeah, so I agree that the setting from Dhanak is mostly in the desert. So moving on onto where they're on their journey, it's harsh and dangerous and desolate and unforgiving, which makes Paddy and Chotu's journey, their internal and external journey, all the more difficult. And I think this obviously reflects the challenges that Chotu faces every day. He is in danger on his walk home from school. He's an easy target for the bullies, but he's so brave and he faces them head on, not seeming to care at all when they steal his trousers. And I absolutely love his response on page 9 when he arrives home and his uncle lifted his head to look at them and began to laugh. "Bumped into Fat Boona, took your pants off again, huh?" "Very funny," said Chotu, walking into the house in his underwear. "He's such a moron taking off a blind boy's clothes. Why would I feel ashamed? I can't see anything. So what difference does it make to me, pants or no pants?" You know, it's just that constant humor. It's wonderful. So yeah, we get our first glimpse of his strength of character and his wicked sense of humor here. There's an unforgiving harshness, I think, from his aunt from the beginning, who seems to resent the children and even underfeed them. So there's, there's neglectful treatment going on there. And it's hinted at that it's probably malnourishment that has caused Chotu's blindness. But Chotu fights with his aunt. He gives as good as he gets. He's not subdued or intimidated by her, even though everyone else seems to be. And then when they're on their journey, the conditions in the desert, they worsen as the children grow nearer to their destination and the goal of meeting Shahrukh Khan. There's a sandstorm, and then there's searing heat, there's burning sands, and they lose their water. But they still push on. They don't lose hope, despite it looking hopeless for them. And I think this resilience in the face of adverse nature represents the resilience when faced with challenges of a disability. And whatever life is throwing at them, they're just meeting it head on. It's wonderful.
Thank you. Yes, I agree about the bottle moment. I think that's a really strong moment. It's very funny, especially coming out of such a dramatic section as well. I'd like to come for the next question to Part first, and then to Rachel and Suzanne. So what do you think about whether or not the characters challenged the stereotypes about disability in these novels? Do you think they give us any insights on wider societal attitudes towards visible and invisible disability?
I was thinking of this in terms of a Susan Sontag essay I read a while back. It's a 1977 essay called "Illness as Metaphor." Sontag writes, "Illness is not a metaphor, and that is the most truthful way of regarding illness and the healthiest way of being it. And that is to resist such metaphorical thinking." And I really love how both the books resist making Chotu and Jake into some kind of heroic symbols. And they kind of defy the belief that disabled people are somehow an inspiration or a role model for able-bodied individuals. And they also resist metaphorical thinking by okay, first let me tell you what I think the kind of dominant belief is, which is that some kind of imperfection, some kind of disability of the body and the mind entails a perfection of the spirit, right? So that they are morally good, morally perfect, somehow elevated because they have a disability. They're not. Chotu loses his bottle all the time. Jake has frequent outbursts because of his learning disability. Chotu gorges himself on jalebis like any 8-year-old child at a wedding feast, and then his stomach is upset. So they are not metaphors, they're not symbols, they are just individuals.
I completely agree. I think what both these books did was show us individuals with depth of character, desires and hopes and interests, sense of humour, love, dislikes, all the things that make up a full and fulfilling life. It just so happens that these characters each have a disability as well. And I think this is the greatest challenge to stereotypes about disability, for people to see past the disability to the individual. It's important to be considerate of a disability. We can't ignore it. We shouldn't ignore it. But it's not the only or most interesting thing about that person. And that is what these books have done, I think. They've given us Chotu, who is wild and funny and unpredictable and loves action movies and is hungry all the time, and Jake, who is kind and sensitive and funny and loves buses and Scooby-Doo and full sugar Coke and hates getting wet. And yes, you're right, Pat, they've got their faults as well, and that's what these books give us. But also what we're shown in these books is the intolerance and the lack of understanding from some of society. I think that this was more keenly felt in What the World Doesn't See. And in part, this is because Jake's learning disability is invisible, and he's a tall young man. And I think people have expectations of the way that he should behave. The intolerance from the women in the cinema, which resulted in Jake getting upset and then the whole family having to leave the cinema and Jake missing his movie, that I found that really heartbreaking. That was really sad because Jake was confused. He didn't know why he couldn't stay and watch his movie. And then the people on the bus suggesting that he shouldn't be out and about if he can't manage the stairs on the bus. It's just cruel. But we also see in this book such kindness, from Bray and Beth and Garen at the caravan park to Benjamin and his mum at the zoo. So we're showing the pain, but we're also showing the right way to interact too.
Yes, I totally agree with both Parth and Rachel that we meet whole characters. And I felt that in Dhanak really there's a challenge straight away to kind of a stereotype of disability from the character of Chotu himself. He immediately shows us he's not defined by having a disability. And I sort of felt I loved the cleverness of the opener with Chotu's daily ritual ending with "I'm not blind" as he catches the jaggery, and contrasting with at the end, "Oh, I'm blind," because he misses it once his sight has been restored, and that somehow summed that up for me. His own voice challenges the notion that he can be stereotyped as a disabled person, and I also enjoyed the way that some supporting characters used humour to challenge or to show how to be. That lovely moment when Chotu meets Shamsta for the first time, and he innocently exclaims, tactlessly, innocently explains, blind when introduced rather than, you know, saying hello. And his father corrects him in the most wonderfully humorous way. And then we see Shamster finding a really empathic response, wondering how it might feel to be blind and respecting Chotu for his strength. In terms of kind of more painful attitudes, I thought the character of Gowrie portrayed a very painful attitude towards Chotu. And I felt there's some societal attitudes shown through her unsympathetic and deeply unkind treatment. Her response does become the call to the adventure, and in some ways I felt her character was slightly mirrored in Auntie Eve in What the World Doesn't See, who puts Jake in care without even telling Maudie, which was deeply shocking. They both become catalysts, but then we also see that kind of then that can then the catalyst for them both, for all four of those characters going on their journeys, challenging negative responses to the idea of disability.
Thank you. Yes, great insights. I love that you said, Hart, that each child is not a metaphor or a symbol. And I agree that I think, Rachel and Suzanne, you also said that, you know, we've been gifted these fully fledged, rounded characters, and it's great to see such representation. But also, I like what you said, I think it was you, Rachel, about having more positive ways of interacting, kind of role modelled through other characters. So thank you. So for the next question, I'd like to come first to Rachel, and then to Suzanne, and then to Part. So do you think the authors provide any commentary on inclusivity or prejudice which resonated with your own experiences or challenged your own viewpoints?
So I spent a lot of time reading and rereading this question, and I have to say I found it very, very hard to decipher, which might be in part due to my own invisible disability. So I wasn't sure how to answer it. So instead, I'd like to read something from What the World Doesn't See, which is on page 165, where Maudie has an awakening and realizes that she's been prejudiced towards people not understanding or respecting Jake correctly. She's speaking to Geraint, who keeps putting his foot in it with Jake, but she's just realized he's doing his best and she needs to give him credit for that. It's okay. How would you know the best way to be around him? I say, realizing as I say this that perhaps I can be a bit unfair on people. It would be great if Jake could just be treated like everyone else and not talked over, but sometimes he does need a little extra understanding, and that usually only comes with getting to know him. I don't ever remember seeing someone like Jake in a book or on TV. It's as though people with learning disabilities don't exist in public. The sadness of that overwhelms me. Jake's been blanked out of life. And I think that just sums up what we're discussing today, that people with disabilities, visible and invisible disabilities, need to be represented more in books and movies and on TV as well.
Yes, thinking about the authors providing a commentary, in a way I felt the narrative in Dhanak is written so inclusively, as well as in What the World Doesn't See, that we know Chotu and Jake from the inside, because we're given their own voices, and that invites the reader to attune to each of the characters' internal experiences. So we get an inside-out view of how the characters experience their worlds, and that which sort of felt like a commentary that transcends stereotypes. And if we think in Dhanak, I mean, I felt it was, I think I may have said that, a running commentary on inclusivity. For example, I was struck by the character of Badrinath, who's so moving. He's introduced as so-called mad, but Harry can eventually see that his response to his tragedy makes sense. He's just chosen to live in a different way. And I found that really moving. And we see prejudice, the author highlighting prejudice from the outside world, very stark with the policeman, considering blindness, I mentioned before, such a nuisance, needed someone with them all the time, as if a blind person's a burden without any agency of their own, losing the sense as a person, like oneself, with differing skills and characteristics. And in Dhanak, the author also uses Carrie's voice to comment on prejudice. She trusts the barber and fears the white man, believing the white man will be the poisoner, but the opposite is the case, and so she revises her initial assessment. And Mel Darbon gives stark examples of the prejudice facing Jake, showing really inhumane attitudes of the wider society. Passages where characters have, voiced the idea that Jake shouldn't be allowed out in public. It's so incredibly painful to read. And we see their distress in response to this sheer unkindness. And I felt that really builds empathy and understanding. I felt that there's something about, particularly in both books, thinking of the world doesn't see, my own experience of working with and living alongside people with various learning difficulties really resonates with those kind of attitudes. People, for example, being talked about as if they're not there.
Just picking up on what Suzanne was talking about kindness and empathy, I think in Mel Darbon, For the World Doesn't See, it's this kind of commentary on inclusion and prejudice is embodied in the character of Maudie, and how she asks people, and she's constantly telling off people to not talk over Jake, to see Jake for who he is, and to not try to cure or fix or repair or restore Jake to this some kind of able body, not to assimilate, but to empathize. And I think Darbon touches on that really lovely, in a really lovely way at the end in the author's note when she says, living with her disabled brother, Guy, taught her about kindness, empathy, and love. And I think this is like an effective triangle that is an antidote to discriminatory social response of pity, disgust, shame. I also loved that that we never really know what is the learning disability that Jake has, right? So that forces us to look at Jake not through the lens of his disability, to not delimit the character by his disability, but instead to see who Jake really is. And also tells us that disabled people, even though they might share a disability, they're not a monolith. Autistic people are not monoliths. Blind people are not monoliths. Every kind of learning disability, the experience of every disability is different. And I really love that. And just finally, I think in both the books, zooming out, their disability is not a weakness, right? It poses certain challenges, but it does not need to be something that needs to go away. And the deviance from kind of the dominant social order denotes an openness to change and acceptance of difference. And it is the norm that becomes destabilized through the lives of Jake and Chotu and Buddy and Maudie. And that is the obstacle, the norm, the stereotypical way of thinking about disabled bodies and minds. That needs to be the one that needs to change, not the disabled people themselves.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Rachel, for finding your way around my question. And I like what you said, Part, about, people are living with complex, multiple disabilities, so it's not just, it's kind of one way of describing. And then we're going to pick up on, you mentioned the author's note, we're going to pick up on that in our next question. And if I could come to Suzanne first for that question, and then Part, and then Rachel. So in the author's note, which I loved, in What the World Doesn't See, it tells us that people with disabilities are the most underrepresented group in fiction. So I wondered if there were any other books from your countries that give insights which helped to dispel some of the myths of disability, because I'm sure we've all come across many examples of not very well represented disability in books over the years. But it'd be great to hear some maybe more contemporary ones. They don't have to be contemporary, but which dispel the myths that you'd like to share or to recommend to us.
Yes, well, I did agree with Mel Darbon, actually, as I realised I couldn't locate many novels for children representing people with disabilities, but two actually immediately sprang into my mind. And the first isn't quite so contemporary as it's 2007, but it's Safi's Angel by Hilary Mackay. And it's one of the series of books about a particular family called the Casson family. And in this book, there's a highly spirited character called Sarah, who just happens to be a wheelchair user. And she's, in fact, the kind of initiating force in that novel for the protagonist, Safi, finding her angel, which is an enormous part of her identity, as Sarah hatches an absolutely audacious plan. And then the way Mackay writes Sarah, she just brings such a sense of freedom in her portrayal of this character. And she doesn't feel internally or even externally limited by being a wheelchair user, although the world around her is what's limiting, not Sarah herself. And I just love the expansiveness of the portrayal of this character, Sarah, and felt it really did challenge stereotypical ideas about being a wheelchair user, the confinement of that. So it's just beautifully written. And another book that sprang to my mind, which is a bit more contemporary, I think it's 2022, is Seed by Carol Lewis. The main protagonist is a boy who lives with a mother who's impacted with mental health issues. She's a hoarder. It's very movingly written, and the book itself explores some very painful themes, but uses humour and a touch of magic realism to kind of give it a light touch. But I'm recommend it in particular because there's a portrayal of a character who's the main ally called Gracie, who's a dancer who just happens to be deaf. And again, you see an absolutely beautiful portrayal and have an inside out idea of Gracie's world. And that was just done so beautifully. So that's one I would recommend.
I have two recommendations for children's books. First is a book called Kanna Panna by Zai Viteka. It's this incredibly gorgeously illustrated children's book about this visually impaired boy called Kanna Panna. And it's about his life, it's about a day in his life, it's about his friends, it's about his love for nature. And I want to recommend this particularly because the book shows us that there's a lot of similarity with both Dhanak and what the world doesn't see, that disabled people are just people. They have their own experiences, their own lives, and I think it's such an important and beautiful message, which is not done in a preachy way at all. I think very important for young people. The second book is The House of Uncommons by Vishakar George. And this is a book about Krishna, a boy who has HIV, and he starts studying at a boarding school for students with HIV. And it's a story about community, about coming together, about really the logistical challenges of managing a chronic illness like HIV/AIDS and how it impacts children. I think it was a real tearjerker for me.
So yes, I've read some wonderful books with characters with a disability. Firstly, I'd like to recommend anything by Elle McNichol because she is an awesome writer and she's an advocate for better representation of neurodiversity in publishing. My favourites of her books are Like a Charm and Like a Curse, which are about a vivacious dyspraxic tween who discovers she's an important part of a magical family. Secondly, a very funny book that I read last year called The Boy Who Made Everyone Laugh by Helen Rutter, which is about a boy with a stammer and he wants to be a stand-up comedian. Helen Rutter is a comedian, and this story is based on her son who has a stammer. I'd also like to recommend Mel Darbon's first novel, Rosie Loves Jack, which is just absolutely beautiful. It is a story, it's a love story with a journey, and there's peril, and there's so much heart and soul. And this is the only book I've read where the main characters have Down syndrome, and it's written with the same touching and respectful tone that she wrote What the World Doesn't See. Rosie is a determined and brave main character, and I couldn't help but fall in love with her and root for her on her quest.
Brilliant, thanks so much. I want to read all of those now. And I've been to see Helen Rutter at the Cheltenham Bath Children's Literature Festival. She was absolutely brilliant and hilarious. So yeah.
I saw her too at the Bath Children's Literature Festival. I wonder if we saw her together.
Probably. And I also wanted to pitch for Sing If You Can't Dance by our own Alexia Casali, which is absolutely brilliant. It's so relatable and close insight into living with an unpredictable and difficult to manage physical disability while you're trying to do all the things you want to do and live your life to the full. So I highly recommend that as well. So I've jotted them all down, so I'll make sure that those are shared. I may have to check some spellings, but yeah. So for the next question, I'd like to go to Part first, then to Rachel, and then to Suzanne. How well do you think readers in your part of the world would be able to relate to these books?
If I'm being entirely honest, this is a question that, it's a very simple question that really trumped me. Because I've been thinking about relatability as a kind of metric to measure and what that metric does. Before I start thinking about that, I think a simple answer would be yes. These are books that are immensely readable, and they're relatable in certain cultural contexts, but they come out, you understand what's going on quite easily. Yeah, I think everybody can understand this. Everybody in India will be understand this. But I was thinking about relatability as kind of the measure of a reader's attempts, ability to understand alterity. And I don't know how useful that metric is then, because I think the best books are those that challenge perspectives, that present unique experiences. And that presentation does not have to be built on a foundation of relatability.
Although Dhanak is set in an unfamiliar landscape with unfamiliar names and foods and clothing, I think at its core, it's a familiar story of love and bravery and determination. It's about the powerful bond between siblings and the lengths one brave young girl will go to protect her younger brother, which is, also the description for what the world doesn't see as well. So it's very relatable. The humour is sublime. Everyone knows a cheeky little brother who argues back and winds everyone up, even if they don't have one themselves. And sight impairment is a disability that affects people in all parts of the world. So I think people in the UK would definitely relate to this book. I would really love to see the movie that it's based on too, and I haven't found anywhere that I can watch it. So if anyone can recommend where I might be able to watch it, because it looks amazing.
Yes, if my own experience of reading Dhanak is anything to go by, I felt it was hugely relatable, and it entices you into a very different setting, and it's full of just the humour. It's just wonderful. The bravery, the determination, the characters. I felt it was completely relatable, as well as the kind of deeper message of the book. So, sort of unqualified yes, really.
Thank you. And thank you for posting that link, Part. So you can see it on YouTube. It's in Hindi with no subtitles, but I think because I'd read the book, I was able to watch it. The acting is amazing. Those children are phenomenal actors. So I think it's worth a watch. And because you've read it, you know what's happening. So yeah, it's a beautiful film. Thank you. Right then, so I'd love to hear some of your favourite passages of the two books that we've discussed. So I thought if we start with Rachel and then go to Suzanne and then finish with Part.
Yeah, just mentioning about the movie first, the author, sorry, the actor interviews in the back of the book that I have, the copy of the book that I have is lovely. And it was interesting hearing about how emotionally invested they became in the characters they were playing. In particular, the scene at the end where Parry had to lay down, or the actress who plays Parry had to lay down in the hot burning sands for 8 hours. So, you know, she was experiencing that pain herself. So yes, I will check that out. Thank you. So I am reading from Dhanak, the bottom of 69 to the top of 71. So it's where Parry and Chotu have just come across what they think is a pile of rags, but when they get closer, they realize it's a white man, a foreign man, who they offer water to. But then Parry feels very worried that he might harm them, so she's being cautious of him, and he's just offered them some chocolate. He crawled over to his rucksack, rummaged in it, and took out 2 huge bars of chocolate and gave one to each of them. Chotu grabbed his and began peeling off the cover at once. Parry took hers, but she was still suspicious. These people put drugs in chocolate, she told Chotu. Just because you can see, you think you know everything. Learn to trust people. Chotu took a big bite of his chocolate. The next moment, he had keeled over and Parry screamed, "Chotu, Chotu, what is it, Chotu?" The foreigner came towards them. Parry glared at him and leaned over Chotu. She shook him. "Chotu, get up. Chotu, please." Chotu suddenly sat up, grinning from ear to ear. "Idiot ass, how dare you frighten me like that? If you ever do this again, I'll..." She smacked him hard. "I wish I could have seen your face," Chotu said. Parry tried to dust him down, but he was laughing like a lunatic and wouldn't stay still. The foreigner was laughing too. Parry wanted to frown, but she couldn't help herself. She started chuckling. "Ass, idiot," she said fondly. They helped the foreigner collect the scattered belongings. He got to his feet slowly, and they walked together towards the bus stop. They had learnt a bit of English in school, yet they understood only half of what he was saying. He spoke so fast. He asked them their names, but try as they might, they couldn't get him to say them right. He called them Parry and Chotu. His name was Douglas Adams. Chotu tried saying it several times. Finally, the man said, "Call me Doug." The reason I love this bit is because, as Suzanne has mentioned earlier, we see Parry being judgmental. You know, she's judging this man on the way he looks and being skeptical and thinking that he's going to harm them. But then in the next scene, we have a character who does mean them harm, and they choose to go off with this other character and not stay with Doug. So it's kind of challenging her preconceptions about people. We also see Chotu's wonderful cheeky sense of humor again, and I just love the fact that we have a character called Douglas Adams. It's just so random. It's just thrown in there and it's not mentioned again at all. There's no reference to it. It's like, it's Douglas Adams, why not? And then just very quickly, it's actually not in the story. So this is from What the World Doesn't See. It's actually from Mel Darbon's author's note at the end, the very, very end, when she's explaining the inspiration for the book and how the book and Jake are based on her brother Guy. And I just absolutely love this. Guy made the world special just by being in it.
Yes, well, I've chosen a piece from Dhanak. It's from page 78 to near the top of page 80. And it's just after the children have been rescued by Mohini, the dancer who's also a robber. And they take her to meet Dadisa because of the magic. They reached a hut at the farthest end of the camp. A dark figure came out slowly. Harry took a quick breath. "Don't be scared. Dadisa is the one who told me that I would find you two. She sent me to look for you." The old woman's eyes were opaque, but still seemed to glow with an inner light. "She can't see," Harry whispered. "Are you blind like me?" Chotu asked, diplomatic as ever. "Seeing is overrated," said Dadisa. I can see whatever I want, whenever I want, inside my head. Mahini went away to feed the camels. Can't let them stay hungry, she said. She said she would come and fetch them later. Harry watched her go, a little anxious. The old woman made her nervous. She had an ancient voice, and her opaque eyes seemed to see right into their souls. Don't be afraid, girl, she said. Come, you must be hungry. Yes, said Chotu at once. Dadisa cackled. They sat around a fire and ate the sweet churma she gave them. Chotu, of course, shoveled it into his mouth in fistfuls. He'd clearly learned nothing from his stomach upset in Balara. Dadisa, can you do magic? Asked Chotu, mid-chew. The world is full of magic, said Dadisa, her blank eyes gleaming in the firelight. Just look with a pure heart and you will see it. But I can't see anything, said Chotu, missing the point, as he often did. You don't see magic with your eyes, boy. You see it with your mind and your heart. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Harry could sense a sudden change in the air, as if all the creatures of the world had stopped to listen. Magic is everywhere. It is all around us. Once you see that, all you have to do is reach out and grab some in your fist and swallow it. Suddenly, Harry could feel the magic. She stretched out her hand, closed her fist around the magic, and swallowed it.
That's so lovely. For me, I'll start with the scene from Dhanak. This is on page number 11, right at the end. This is when Pari has seen the poster of Shah Rukh Khan, and that's kind of the catalyst for the entire journey. Pari's mind was whirling. The poster kept popping up in her head. Donate your eyes, change someone's life. Finally, there was a glimmer of hope. Shah Rukh Khan would help Chotu get his eyesight back. After the movie, while Chacha and Chotu walked towards the card, Pari went to the wall, and when no one was looking, she ripped off the poster and took it home. She felt that it had been put there just for her. It was as if Shah Rukh Khan knew that she was looking desperately for an answer to the problem. That night, while everyone slept, Pari stayed up, writing a letter to Shah Rukh. It was difficult to know what to say. I'm writing to you because you can give eyes, she wrote. That didn't make sense. How could Shah Rukh give eyes? Should she tell him she had seen him on a poster? But he was on so many posters. She wrote and scratched and wrote and scratched until the letter looked like a jungle of scratches. Once she was satisfied, she wrote it neatly on another page. My dear Shah Rukh Khan, my name is Pari. I live in a village in Rajasthan called Churudhani with my brother Chotu. Chotu is blind. Please help my brother get his eyesight back. I promised him that he would see again before he became 9 years old. His 9th birthday is on October 2nd. There are only 2 months left. Thank you, Pari. And apart from being the reason why we have the novel in the first place, the story in the first place, I was just so touched by the innocence and also the audacity that Pari displays here. To write a letter to the most famous actor in the country. Incredible. And also, if we have the time, I would like to read a passage from What the World Doesn't See. This is chapter 6, Jake, page 28. I looked for Mum. I couldn't find her. I didn't find Dad. He never came back. That was lots of time ago. It made me full of sad. Then the bees came inside my head. They wouldn't leave me alone. Buzz. Sometimes I can't stop them. I want Mum back. She knows what to do. Auntie Eve doesn't. I tried to tell her. She wouldn't listen. She got soap in my eyes. I broke the shower. I didn't mean to. The monster in my head told me to do that. Maudie watched television with me. We saw bats. I like animals. They don't hurt you. When Maudie cleaned my teeth, the brush makes my teeth prickle. I put the toothbrush down the toilet. The monster is very bad. I'm going to school tomorrow. Derek's my teacher. On Thursday, we sat in the music room, but we didn't sing. A funny lady came. She had orange hair. She said my name. I didn't look at her. She had a green bobble hat. I don't like green. Auntie Eve was there. I couldn't see Mum. That lady is coming back. Derek said, I'm having a holiday. I don't want to stay in that lady's house. It's too big. Eve said, it's lovely. It's not my house. I'm going to push her out of my head. I'm not going there. Who will chase the monster away? And for me, this is such a beautiful scene to read because of the style, and because this is what a great way to give readers who probably do not share Chudu's disability, Jake's disability, an insight into his mind and into the kind of logic that exists in his mind, the kind of associative links that he makes, this kind of stream of consciousness style, and how the metaphor of the buzzing bees to represent negative thoughts or spiraling, essentially, how that pops up not just in Jake, but also in other characters. Maudie at one point also describes her feeling of being overwhelmed as the buzzing of bees.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for those fabulous choices. And yeah, I think that books like these hopefully make authors and people who are not yet authors come and give it a go to tell the stories that matter, even if they're hard to write. And it's just been brilliant to read Dhanak and What the World Sees, and the bravery that's gone into telling these really important stories. It certainly inspired me. I think, I don't know what your course is like, Part, but certainly on the Bath Spa course, you're really encouraged to write possibly the hardest story to tell. I went to do the course to write a sort of cozy, selkie fantasy and came out writing a contemporary story for 17-year-olds about an alcoholic parent. So I think these books contribute to that as well, to helping to make us brave. And I just want to finish with Mel Darbon's, again, a bit from her author's note where she says, I wrote my book, What the World Doesn't See, because I wanted to give my brother a voice that he couldn't have for himself. And I hoped by doing so, it might give a voice to others like him too, or that readers might recognise in him either themselves or someone they knew. As a child, I never saw anyone with severe learning disabilities in a book, which made me very unhappy because my brother filled our lives with love and laughter. So yeah, we'll just leave it on those words from Mel Darbon. Thanks so much for a detailed and enlightening discussion of these two brilliant books.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you, everybody. That was a lovely, rich discussion, all the different things that we saw in each book.
Thank you all so very, very much. And Claire, thank you for that wonderful sharing. If there's anything else you'd like to add or mention, now is the time. But that sounded, I promise I wasn't eavesdropping too much. I was just lurking in the background, and I will so look forward to, with the rest of our audience, catching up with this wonderful dialogue. Thank you all for your time. Thank you to everyone out there watching. And we will look forward to growing and developing literature across borders and seeing where it takes us. So thank you very much and have a lovely evening, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.